I'm a political ethicist. That means I study the morality of politics. I hear those chuckles. When I tell people what I do, the first response is usually some form of humor, right? Slightly defensive, slightly cynical. Once we get past that, I usually get some form of the following question. Is American democracy falling apart? Are we so busy yelling at each other that we can't run the country anymore? Is this political fever state we seem to be in terminal? Well, this talk is the answer to that question that I cannot give in polite conversation. So to start, I've got a rather tragic story for you. This is Dr. Anna Poe. Dr. Poe was the presiding physician at the Memorial Medical Center in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, Louisiana in August of 2005. Her unit was a special unit that housed senior citizens with multiple chronic conditions that required constant care in order to keep them on this side of the living. Now, in August of 2005, of course, the 29th, Hurricane Katrina came rolling through. And after the storm passed, in the following 5 days, no electricity, no water, things deteriorated at Memorial Medical faster and more tragically than anyone had thought possible. The hospital had already gone from normal operations to crisis operations, emptying themselves out of ambulatory patients that didn't need to be there, stocking up supplies. But over this unexpected 5 days with no rescue, no help in sight, they went from crisis operations to triage operations, and when things got really desperate, to reverse triage operations. Now, triage operations are when things get really bad, right? And you categorize the patients and you take the worst patients first. Reverse triage operations are when things get really, really bad and you set the worst cases aside knowing you're not going to be able to help them. Like this poor Category 3, worst case scenario, unconscious gentleman. By Thursday evening, 4 days after the storm had passed, Dr. Poe was going to face an absolutely impossible decision. The police had come into the hospital, briefly, and said, "You've heard the shots outside, you've heard the lawlessness threatening in the area, we can no longer protect you, we are ordering you to leave." But of course, this is impossible for the last remaining unconscious Category 3 patients in her unit. So now she has to decide. She has to leave, and she can simply abandon her patients, which will probably mean that they will die of dehydration or exposure over the next few days, both of which are long, drawn-out, excruciatingly painful, horrible deaths. Or she can kill them. Give them large injections of pain drugs and allow them to go quickly and quietly. Because evacuation wasn't coming for them, and they had very little chance of surviving an evacuation if it did. The question I have for you is, if you were in Dr. Poe's shoes, what would you do? Now you might be thinking those can't have been her only choices. And I wish I had enough time to tell you the whole story to convince you they were. They were the only choices she had. And when I pose this question in the public values workshops that I run, I get two general families of answers. One, she can't do that. She's playing God with people's lives. She's taking people's lives and people's very fate into her hands in a way that she has absolutely no right to. Or, well, she can't let them leave there. She can't abandon them and let them suffer. She has to help them. All 9 of her patients were eventually found dead in her unit with high levels of these drugs in their system. Now you might be thinking, thank God I don't have to actually face that decision, right? Thank God I'm not in Dr. Poe's position. That would be horrid. I can't do that. Well, I've got bad news for you. You live in a democracy. That means you participate in your government. That means you take people's lives and fates into your hands on a daily basis. Every time you make a political decision, and every time you avoid making a political decision, you take people's lives into your hands. Let me give you some examples. Policing. The state maintains a police force in our name that uses lethal and violent force to enforce the moral and social order and protect us from bad individuals. This is necessary and good. We need to do this. But we also know that police forces are made up of imperfect humans. They use violent and lethal force in imperfect ways and apply the authority they are given under color of law in imperfect ways. So we have to do it, but let's do it very carefully. That might seem like a bit of a gimme. The police kill people in our name, so yeah, that's going to be a moral dilemma. What about something else that seems maybe a little less dramatic, a little more innocuous? How about childhood education? Well, childhood education seems pretty straightforward. We're preparing our children for their future by teaching them what they need to know. This is necessary and good. But remember that we are preparing our children for their future by burdening them with our past. Common education is indoctrination. There's no way around it. We are messing with their lives, their thoughts, their identities as they are forming. Now, both of these examples that I've given are examples of us taking the lives and fates of individuals into our hands in order to create better outcomes for the community as a whole. That's a horrible moral dilemma. And unfortunately, it is not an avoidable moral dilemma. The conflict between individual on the one hand and community on the other is the fundamental paradox built into the very idea of democracy. One way to understand this is to imagine someone trying to create a democracy from the ground up. Hey, y'all, this is good. This is going to be great. We're all going to get together. I got this idea. All right? We're going to get together. We're going to call each other co-citizens. And we're all going to kind of pull in the same direction in order to build our community. Oh, and you're all individuals and you get to do whatever you want. See the conflict? It's unavoidable. It's amazing this thing even works. There's one ephemeral, difficult to put your finger on, hard to define, and even harder to create value that makes this all work. Trust. And when I start talking about trust in relation to democracy, people immediately think about the trust that citizens have in their government, or lack of it. And that's important, but that's only a small piece of the trust circle that democracy requires. It's not where we start, it's not where we end. Where we start is with individuals. Remember those folks that had to all get together, pull in the same direction, create a democracy? Well, the first thing they had to do was trust each other. It starts with you. You have to trust your neighbor. You have to trust whoever's driving that truck barreling down on you at 60 miles an hour to stay just a few feet to the left. You have to trust the stranger sitting next to you tonight. Only then can we all get together and think about whether we trust the government that we're all mutually imposing on each other. But that's not where it ends. The next step in the trust circle is possibly the most important, even though we never talk about it. It's important because it's precisely what distinguishes a democracy from every other form of government. A democratic government must trust its own citizens. The moment a democratic government stops trusting its own citizens is the moment it replaces the judgment of the people with its own judgment, and you're on your way to authoritarianism. So a democracy is millions upon millions upon millions of people mutually and simultaneously trusting each other to mess with each other's lives and fates as little and as fairly as possible in order to build the best community possible. So are we still doing that in America? Do we trust each other enough to continue this crazy experiment in people power? Or is the anger that we see in the streets the first sign of our demise? Are we doomed? Well, the answer that I will give is that American democracy is down, but not yet out. Our democracy is sick. It's diseased. It's got an infection. It's got a rather nasty infection. But this isn't it. The political nastiness you see on your 24-hour cable news channels, the anger you see in the streets, that's not the infection. That's a response to the infection. The infection is a familiar one. It has struck societies across history. It's as reliable a returning visitor as the seasonal flu, and it is this country's original sin. It is an infection of hate, fear, and violence against a group or groups of people we have decided are not us. Not us, but other. Groups of people we've decided don't get the basic protections that we demand for ourselves. Groups of people that we have decided are fair game for arbitrary state power. We can arrest them, we can incarcerate them, we can kill them, we can kidnap their children without answering to anyone. Why is othering so toxic to democracy? Well, think about it. When you other a group of people under the banner of state law, you've created a group of people for whom the community they live in is no longer a protection from the threats that they face. Instead, the community they live in is the threat that they face. Once I've been othered, what motivation do I have to sit down with you in rational and reasonable debate? What should possibly cause me to believe that you're going to sit down and negotiate with me in good faith? When this country once again experiences a breakout in othering, it is our moral obligation to turn up the political heat. And not just the groups that are affected, all of us. This political heat is like the fever in a diseased patient. It's really horrible to live through, But it's the only thing that has a chance of burning out this infection. It's the only thing that has a chance of burning out this infection. So to come back to our original question, is this political fever state terminal? That's up to us. This fever can either kill us or it can cure us. Be a part of the cure. Thank you.